I picked out this story just for you. Let's listen to it.
Salvage of Loyalty. Chapter 1. The Drowning Citadel. The Ocean Planet Citadel rose from the endless waters like a monument to hubris, its spires breaching the violet waves that hammered against ancient containment walls. 3 centuries of rising tides had transformed what was once a gleaming seat of galactic governance into a desperate island of survival, its lower levels long since surrendered to the crushing depths. What remained above the waterline was a labyrinth of corroded walkways, jury-rigged pumps, and the desperate hopes of those too stubborn or too poor to abandon the dying structure. Jax Vorn picked his way across a maintenance catwalk that groaned beneath his boots, each step sending flakes of rust spiraling down into the churning sea far below. The junk Scavenger had seen better days. His environmental suit was patched in 17 places, his breath mask recycled the same stale air for the 3rd consecutive hour, and the credits in his account wouldn't buy a decent meal on any civilized world. But he was alive, and in the salvage trade, alive was the only metric that truly mattered. "You're late," crackled a voice through his suit's comm unit. "The tide's rising faster than predicted. You've got maybe 6 hours before the eastern quadrant goes under." Jax adjusted his grip on the heavy equipment bag slung across his shoulder. "Relax, old man. I've pulled scrap from worse than this. Remember the derelict over Kessel's Folly? That hull was splitting apart while I was still inside it." "That's exactly what concerns me," the voice replied. "Your luck is going to run out someday, and I'd prefer it not happen while you owe me 3 months' commission." The Scavenger allowed himself a grim smile beneath his mask. His contact, a weathered broker named Ren who operated from the dubious safety of the Citadel's mid-level trading hubs, had been a reliable source of work for years. Reliable, and perpetually convinced that each new job would be Jax's last. The current contract had arrived through unofficial syndicate channels. Locate and retrieve a specific piece of pre-collapse technology rumored to be hidden somewhere in the Citadel's submerged archives. The payout was substantial enough to make Jax suspicious, but desperation had a way of silencing such concerns. 3 months behind on his ship's maintenance, 2 months behind on his docking fees, and one very persistent bounty hunter named Cray, who seemed to think Jax owed him money for a deal gone wrong on Xylo's trading post. The sooner he completed this job, the sooner he could disappear into the outer territories. He reached the access hatch that would take him into the Citadel's interior and paused, studying the security panel. Standard Imperial-era lockout, probably installed during the original construction and maintained by automated systems that had forgotten how to fail. Jax produced a bypass module from his kit, a jury-rigged collection of scavenge circuits and black market decryption algorithms, and slotted it into the panel's auxiliary port. The hatch hissed open, releasing a gust of humid, chemical-laden air that immediately fogged his visor. The Citadel's environmental systems were failing again, another symptom of the slow decay that threatened to consume the entire structure. Jax stepped through into flickering emergency lighting, his boots splashing in shallow water that had already begun to infiltrate this level. According to the schematics Ren had provided, the archives were located 12 levels below the current waterline, accessible only through a series of maintenance shafts and emergency bulkheads that had been sealed since the collapse. Whatever was down there had been sitting in darkness for 300 years, waiting for someone desperate enough to come looking. Jax had been that someone his entire life. The descent took longer than anticipated. Several of the maintenance ladders had corroded beyond use, forcing him to find alternate routes through flooded corridors and collapsed chambers. The water was cold and thick with sediment, and more than once he found himself navigating by touch alone when his suit's lights flickered and died. The deeper he went, the more the Citadel felt like a tomb, its walls covered in the faded remnants of official proclamations and evacuation notices that no one had lived long enough to read. By the time he reached the archive level, his oxygen reserves were down to 40%, and the nagging unease in his gut had grown into something approaching genuine concern. The job was supposed to be straightforward: get in, retrieve the target, get out. But something about the silence down here felt wrong. No ambient noise from failing systems, no distant groans of stressed metal, nothing but the sound of his own breathing and the soft gurgle of water against his boots. The archive chamber itself was surprisingly intact, its heavy blast doors still sealed against the flooding that had consumed the surrounding corridors. Jax's bypass module took nearly 20 minutes to crack the security protocols, far longer than it should have, suggesting that someone had upgraded the systems relatively recently. The realization sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. The doors parted with a grinding protest, revealing a chamber filled with preserved data stacks and containment units. Emergency lighting cast everything in a dull red glow, and for a moment Jax simply stood in the entrance, letting his eyes adjust to the gloom. Then, he saw the figure standing at the far end of the chamber. It was humanoid in shape, but clearly not human, limbs too long, joints bent at angles that suggested an anatomy evolved for something other than standard gravity. Its surface was a smooth, featureless gray broken only by a cluster of optical sensors arranged where a face should be. It stood perfectly still, and yet Jax had the distinct impression that it had been aware of his presence from the moment he breached the door. Designation: Drone 800. It said, the voice emerging from somewhere within its chassis rather than from any visible speaker. Function: Archive security and asset protection. You are unauthorized personnel. State your purpose or be terminated. Jax raised his hand slowly, his mind racing through options. Combat was out of the question. Whatever this thing was, it had been designed to protect valuable assets from serious threats, and a lone scavenger with a rusty sidearm didn't qualify. Running was equally pointless. The thing would cut him down before he made it 3 steps. That left talking, which had never been his strongest skill, but was currently his only option. Name's Jax, he said, keeping his voice steady. I'm a contractor. I was hired to retrieve an item from this facility. I didn't realize anyone was still active down here. The drone's optical sensors shifted, focusing on him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Contractor. This designation does not appear in authorized personnel records. Your presence constitutes a security breach. Termination protocol initiated. Wait. Jax's hand moved toward his kit bag, and the drone's arm transformed. Literally transformed, metal flowing like liquid to form a weapon barrel that pointed directly at his chest. He froze. Look, I get it. You're programmed to protect this place. But the people who gave you those orders have been dead for 300 years. The government that built this facility doesn't exist anymore. Whatever you're guarding down here, nobody's coming for it except people like me. Your statement is factually accurate, the drone replied. It is also irrelevant. My programming does not include provisions for organizational dissolution. I am to protect these assets until relieved by authorized command structure. Is there any way to establish new authorization? The drone considered this. Provisions exist for emergency command transfer in the event of total organizational collapse. Requirements include verification of galactic citizenship, demonstrated commitment to protected asset preservation, and execution of Oath of Allegiance to primary mission parameters. Jax blinked behind his mask. An oath? He'd expected a fight, or a chase, or a quick death, not a bureaucratic procedure. But if it offered a way out of this situation without getting vaporized, he was willing to play along. What kind of oath are we talking about? The drone's arm weapon retracted, reforming into a limb that might charitably be called a hand. A formal commitment, witnessed and recorded, binding you to the protection of archive assets against all threats. Upon successful execution, you will be granted provisional access to designated materials. And if I refuse? Termination protocol will resume. Right. Jax lowered his hands. Let's talk about this oath. The next hour was spent in a surreal negotiation with a machine that seemed genuinely puzzled by the concept of the passage of time. The drone designation 800, it insisted on being called, had been activated 312 years ago, approximately 6 months before the collapse that had ended galactic civilization as its creators had known it. In all that time, it had never received new orders, never been relieved of duty, never even been visited by anyone who wasn't immediately classified as a security threat. Jax found himself feeling something he hadn't expected: sympathy. The thing was trapped in an endless loop of duty, protecting treasures that no one remembered for masters who had long since turned to dust. It was, in its own way, as much a victim of the collapse as the billions who had died in the chaos. The oath requires a witness of appropriate standing, Drone 800 explained. In the absence of authorized command personnel, a provisional witness may be designated. However, such designation requires the presence of a secondary party to verify the witness's legitimacy. Jax frowned. You're saying I need to bring someone else down here? Another person to vouch for me?
Correct.
The oath cannot be executed in isolation. Protocol demands verification of intent through independent observation.
This was getting complicated.
Jax had come down here alone specifically to avoid complications, and now he was being told he needed to drag someone else into this flooded tomb. The only person within reasonable distance was Ren, and the old broker was about as likely to venture into the lower levels as he was to sprout wings and fly to the nearest star system. I might be able to reach someone, he said slowly, but it'll take time, and my oxygen is running low. Environmental systems in this chamber remain functional, the drone replied. You may remove your breathing apparatus. Air quality is within acceptable parameters for human physiology. Jax hesitated, then unsealed his mask. The air that hit his face was stale and cold but breathable, carrying the faint scent of recycled atmosphere and something else, something almost like incense, though he couldn't imagine why that would be present in a pre-collapse archive. Who are you going to contact? The drone asked. Jax considered his options. Ren was the obvious choice, but the old man would demand a cut of whatever payout this job produced, and Jax was already committed to giving the syndicate 40%. There was also the matter of the bounty hunter tracking him. Cray had contacts throughout this sector, and any transmission might reveal his location. But there was one other possibility. A name that had been circulating through the Salvage community for months, attached to rumors of a ship captain who had broken from Imperial service and was operating independently in this region. Someone who might be willing to provide verification services for the right price, and who had the credentials to satisfy whatever remained of the drone's protocols. I know someone, Jax said. A former Imperial officer. She's got the standing, and she's got her own ship. If I can raise her on a secure channel, she might be willing to help. Imperial military personnel are not recognized under current authorization parameters, the drone replied. The Imperial coalition dissolved following the collapse. Their command structure is invalid. She's not Imperial anymore. She's independent. The drone processed this. Independent operators may qualify for provisional witness status, subject to verification of character and intent. You may attempt contact. Jax activated his suit's long-range communications array, praying that the intervening rock and water wouldn't block the signal entirely. After several minutes of static, a voice emerged from the chaos, sharp, authoritative, and unmistakably annoyed. This is Commander Thessera Vey of the independent vessel Aegis. Identify yourself and state the nature of your emergency. Be advised that I charge for rescue operations, and my rates are not negotiable. Jax allowed himself a small breath of relief. Commander Vey, my name is Jax Vorn. I'm a salvage operator currently inside the Ocean Planet Citadel. I've encountered a situation that requires someone with your particular background. I'm prepared to offer compensation for your time. There was a pause on the other end. When the commander spoke again, her voice had lost some of its edge. Jax Vorn. I've heard that name. You're the one who pulled those fusion cores from the Kessel debris field last cycle. Impressive work, if suicidal. I get that a lot. What kind of situation are we talking about? Jax glanced at the drone, which stood motionless, its optical sensors fixed on him with patient intensity. I've found something that requires a formal oath to access. The protocols demand a witness, and the witness needs to be verified by a secondary party. I'm told you might qualify as that secondary party. Another pause, longer this time. An oath? What kind of archive requires an oath for access? Pre-collapse military. The security system is still active, and it won't let me near the target without a formal commitment. And you want me to fly down there, verify your witness, and watch you swear allegiance to a dead government's secrets. When you put it that way, it sounds ridiculous. But the payout on this job is substantial, and I'm willing to split it 3 ways. 3 ways. You, me, and the witness I bring in. Commander Vey was quiet for long enough that Jax began to worry the connection had failed.
Finally, she sighed.
I'm currently in orbit around the third moon, running repairs on my drive systems. I can be at the Citadel in 4 hours. That gives you time to find your witness and prepare for whatever ceremony this machine requires. But I want half the take, and I want your word that this isn't a trap. You have my word. I've heard that before from people less trustworthy than you. Don't make me regret this, Scavenger. The connection severed, and Jax turned back to the drone. She's coming. 4 hours. Acceptable, Drone 800 replied. In the interim, I will prepare the oath documentation. You should also know that another party has detected your communications transmission. They are approaching the Citadel from the southern approach, and their vessel configuration matches known hostile profiles. Jax's stomach dropped. Hostile? How hostile? Their transponder identifies them as belonging to the Shadow Network. Specifically, a kinetic warrior operative known as Derek Sen. He has a substantial bounty registered in several galactic databases, and his known associates include individuals who would be very interested in the contents of this archive. Let me guess, they're not here to help. Unlikely. Shadow Network operatives typically pursue their own agendas, which frequently involve the acquisition of valuable assets through any means necessary. I would recommend preparing for a confrontation. Jax closed his eyes and counted to 10. This job was supposed to be simple. Get in, get the target, get out. Instead, he was caught between a 300-year-old security drone, a former Imperial commander with trust issues, and a Shadow Network killer who probably wanted him dead for reasons he couldn't even remember. Some days he really hated his job. Chapter 2. Ghosts and OETHS. The next 4 hours passed in a tense blur of preparation and paranoia. Jax used the time to familiarize himself with the archive's layout, identifying choke points and potential escape routes in case things went sideways. The Drone 800, though Jax had started thinking of it simply as 8, proved surprisingly helpful, providing tactical analysis of the approaching hostile and tactical recommendations for defense. Your combat capabilities are limited, 8 observed as Jax examined a corroded support strut that might serve as cover. The kinetic warrior possesses enhanced strength and reflexes. Direct confrontation is inadvisable. Thanks for the vote of confidence. I am stating facts, not offering judgment. Your strengths lie elsewhere, specifically in improvisation and technical adaptation. I would recommend leveraging these capabilities rather than attempting to match the hostile in physical combat. Jax couldn't argue with the assessment. He'd survived this long by knowing when to fight and when to find another way, and picking a brawl with someone called a kinetic warrior seemed like an excellent way to end up as a cautionary tale for other scavengers. What can you tell me about this Derek Sen? Why would a Shadow Network operative be interested in this archive? 8's optical sensors shifted, processing data that Jax couldn't see. The Shadow Network has maintained an interest in pre-collapse technology for several decades. Their intelligence operations have identified numerous archive sites similar to this one, though most have been thoroughly looted. It is likely that Sen detected your transmission and deduced the presence of valuable assets. So, he's not here specifically for me. That's something I guess. Correct. However, your presence complicates his objectives. He will likely attempt to eliminate you to prevent competition for the assets.
Great.
So, I've gone from being a target of opportunity to being an obstacle. Your pessimism is noted. I would suggest an alternative perspective. You have access to resources that Sen does not, including my defensive capabilities and the imminent arrival of additional support. If properly coordinated, these assets could prove decisive in any confrontation. Jax considered this. The drone was right. He wasn't alone in this, even if his allies were an ancient security system and a former Imperial officer he'd never met. That was more than he'd had on some jobs, and he'd survived those. What kind of defensive capabilities are we talking about? 8's chassis shifted, panels sliding aside to reveal integrated weapon systems that made Jax's sidearm look like a child's toy. I am equipped for close-quarters defense and medium-range suppression. My combat programming includes tactical analysis, threat prioritization, and adaptive response protocols. I am, however, constrained by my primary function. I cannot leave this archive unless the assets are secured for transport. So you're stuck here. Unless the oath is executed and the assets are formally transferred to your custody. At that point, my programming would recognize you as an authorized command element, and I would be permitted to provide escort to a secure extraction point. That was interesting. If Jax could pull off this oath, he wouldn't just be getting whatever was in the archive, he'd be getting a highly advanced combat drone as a bonus. The value of such an asset was incalculable, enough to set him up for life and finally get clear of the debts and bounties that had been hounding him for years. But first, he had to survive long enough to execute the oath. And that meant dealing with Jax Vorn. The kinetic warrior arrived 2 hours ahead of schedule. Jax heard him before he saw him. The heavy thud of boots on metal, the groan of stressed catwalks, the occasional splash of water displacing under significant weight. 8 had warned him that Shadow Network operatives often possessed enhanced physical capabilities, but the reality was somehow more intimidating than the description. Jax Vorn was massive. Not tall precisely, but dense, muscle and cybernetic enhancement compressed into a frame that seemed to occupy more space than physics should allow. His armor was matte black, broken only by the faint glow of integrated systems, and his face was hidden behind a helmet that featured no visible eye slits. He moved with the deliberate grace of someone who had never lost a fight and couldn't imagine a world where that might change. "Jax Vorn," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I've been tracking you for 3 weeks. Imagine my surprise when you led me here." Jax kept his hand away from his sidearm. Drawing it would only get him killed faster. Jax Vorn. "I'd say it's a pleasure, but I try not to lie to people who could snap my spine like a twig." Sen's helmet tilted slightly. "Honesty. I appreciate that. It saves time." He took a step forward, and the catwalk shuddered beneath his weight. "I'm going to make this simple. You found something down here, something valuable. I want it. You're going to give it to me, and in exchange, I won't kill you and feed your remains to the fish." That's a generous offer. I thought so. Unfortunately, I've already got a deal in place. The archive's security system requires a formal oath before it'll release anything. I'm expecting a witness any hour now, and after that, the assets become my responsibility. Sen was quiet for a moment, processing. An oath? What kind of archive requires an oath? That's what I said. Apparently, it's a pre-collapse military installation. The security drone is still operating under original protocols. A drone. You've been talking to a machine. Surprisingly articulate, actually. You'd like it. It's every bit as charming as you are. The kinetic warrior's posture shifted, tension gathering in his shoulders. You're stalling. Trying to buy time until your witness arrives. It won't work. I can have you unconscious, and this archive cracked open before anyone else makes it down here. You could try, Jax said, and then 8 stepped out of the shadows behind him. The drone's weapon systems were fully deployed, targeting arrays locked on Sen's center mass. This facility is under protection. Any attempt to access assets without authorization will be met with lethal force. Sen turned his head slowly, taking in the drone's armament with the casual assessment of a professional. Impressive. Pre-collapse military tech, still functional after 3 centuries. I've heard rumors about installations like this, but I've never seen one intact. You are in violation of security protocols, 8 continued. You have 10 seconds to begin withdrawal before I engage. Or what? You'll shoot me? Sen laughed, a sound like grinding stone. I've taken fire from warships. A single drone isn't going to. 8 fired. The shot was precise, a concentrated burst of energy that struck Sen in the chest and sent him staggering backward. His armor absorbed most of the impact, but the force was enough to leave a visible scorch mark and crack the catwalk beneath his feet. Next shot will target your helmet seal, 8 said calmly. Your armor is impressive, but it has vulnerabilities. I have had 3 centuries to analyze similar systems. Sen straightened, one hand pressed against the scorched area of his chest plate. When he spoke again, his voice carried a new note of respect. You're right. This is more interesting than I expected. He took a step back, then another. Very well. I'll wait. Your witness arrives. You execute your oath, and then we'll see who walks out of here with the prize. Your restraint is noted, 8 replied. However, I must inform you that the Archive's assets will not be available for contest. Upon successful execution of the oath, they become the property of the oath-taker. Then I'll take them from the oath-taker. Sen's helmet turned toward Jax, and even without visible eyes, the weight of his attention was palpable. Enjoy your ceremony, Scavenger. I'll be seeing you soon. He turned and walked back the way he'd come, his heavy footsteps fading into the distance until silence reclaimed the archive. Jax let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Thanks for that. You are welcome. However, I should note that my analysis indicates a high probability of conflict following the oath execution. Derek Sen is not known for accepting defeat gracefully. Yeah, I got that impression. Jax looked at the drone, really looked at it for the first time, seeing past the weapon systems and tactical programming to something almost like personality. Why are you helping me? Your programming says to protect the assets, but you could have just as easily declared me a threat and been done with it. 8's optical sensors dimmed slightly, a gesture that might have been contemplation. My programming includes provisions for discretionary judgment in situations not explicitly covered by protocol. You came here seeking assets, but you did so through legitimate channels. You attempted negotiation rather than force. That indicates a capacity for reason that is rare in the individuals who find their way to this archive. So, I passed a test I didn't know I was taking. In a manner of speaking, I have been guarding this facility for 312 years. In that time, I have encountered 47 individuals who attempted to access the assets. 43 were hostile and were eliminated. 4 attempted negotiation but lacked the resources to complete the oath process. You are the first to both negotiate in good faith and possess the means to fulfill the requirements. Jax wasn't sure how to feel about being the first successful candidate in 3 centuries. On one hand, it meant he was about to become the owner of extremely valuable assets. On the other, it meant he had a target on his back from a Shadow Network operative who probably wasn't used to losing. Commander Vey should be here within 2 hours, he said. Once she arrives, we can proceed with the oath. After that, I guess we'll see what happens. Agreed. I will continue to monitor Sen's position. He has withdrawn to the upper levels but remains within the facility. I recommend maintaining alert status until the oath is complete. Believe me, I'm not planning to relax until I'm off this planet. They settled into an uneasy wait, Jax pacing the archive chamber while 8 stood motionless, its systems presumably occupied with threat monitoring. The time stretched, each minute feeling like an hour, until finally the welcome crackle of a communications signal broke the silence. Vorn, this is Vey. I've docked at the upper-level airlock, and I'm making my way down. What's this about a Shadow Network operative? Jax activated his comm. He showed up a few hours ago. We got a temporary truce, but I wouldn't count on it lasting. He's waiting for the oath to finish, so he can take whatever I recover. Ambush tactics. Classic Shadow Network. There was a pause then. I'm bringing backup. A colleague of mine owed me a favor, former Imperial Security Specialist. He's not thrilled about the situation, but he knows how to handle himself in a fight. I thought you were coming alone. I thought this was a simple verification job. Plans change. Another pause. We'll be at your position in 30 minutes. Be ready to move. The connection cut, and Jax turned to 8. Looks like we've got more company. Commander Vey is bringing a security specialist. Additional personnel may prove useful in the event of confrontation with Sen. However, I must verify their credentials before permitting them to witness the oath. Will that be a problem? Unlikely. Former Imperial personnel retain their security clearances in my database, provided they were not dishonorably discharged. She said she's independent now. Left the service. Voluntary separation is not disqualifying. I will assess her and her companion upon arrival. Jax nodded, though the drone's lack of visible reaction made the gesture feel somewhat pointless. The waiting was the worst part. The the knowledge that events were in motion around him, that enemies and allies alike were converging on his position, and that the next few hours would determine whether he walked away from this job wealthy or didn't walk away at all. He'd been in tight spots before. This was hardly the first time his profession had put him in mortal danger. But something about this situation felt different, heavier, as if the stakes extended beyond his own survival. The drone, the archive, the approaching kinetic warrior. All of it seemed connected to something larger, something he couldn't quite see but could feel pressing against the edges of his awareness. In 3 centuries of operation, 8 had eliminated 43 threats. Jax wondered how many of them had felt the same way he did now, caught up in forces beyond their control, running toward a destination they couldn't see, hoping that luck or skill or sheer stubbornness would be enough to carry them through. He'd find out soon enough. Chapter 3. The Weight of Words. Commander Thessera Vey moved through the Citadel's flooded corridors with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades navigating hostile environments. Her armor was Imperial issue, though heavily modified. The insignia had been removed, and numerous personal customizations suggested a soldier who had long since stopped caring about regulations. Behind her, the security specialist she'd introduced as Marcus Trent kept pace, his own gear a patchwork of military surplus and black market enhancements. Status, Vey said as they reached the archive level. What are we walking into? Jax met them at the chamber entrance, 8 hovering at his shoulder. The drone is friendly, well, as friendly as a 300-year-old security system gets. The Shadow Network operative is somewhere in the upper levels, waiting for us to finish, so he can make his move. And the archive itself is. He gestured vaguely. A lot. There's more down here than I expected. Vey's eyes swept the chamber, cataloging details with professional detachment. Pre-collapse military storage. I've heard stories about facilities like this, but I've never seen one intact. She turned her attention to 8. You're the security system? I am designation. Drone 800. I have been protecting this facility since its activation 312 standard years ago. And you're willing to release the assets to this scavenger? Upon successful execution of the Oath of Allegiance, yes. His approach was non-hostile, and he has demonstrated the capacity to fulfill the procedural requirements. Vey exchanged a glance with Trent.
An oath.
I've heard of pre-collapse security protocols that required formal commitments, but I thought they were all deactivated during the collapse. Many were, 8 replied. This facility was designed for long-term autonomous operation. My programming includes provisions for continued function even in the absence of organizational support. Convenient. Vey turned back to Jax. You said you'd split the take 3 ways. Does that still apply? It does. 1/3 for me, 1/3 for you, 1/3 for Ren, the broker who set up the job. Ren isn't here. He's my witness. For the oath. Vey frowned. Your witness is a broker who isn't present? How does that work? Jax had been wondering the same thing. 8 had mentioned that the oath required a witness of appropriate standing, verified by a secondary party. He'd assumed Vey would serve as the secondary party, but the witness must be physically present for the oath execution, 8 clarified. However, verification of the witness may be conducted remotely, provided the verifying party possesses appropriate credentials. So, I can verify your broker from here? Correct. You would need to confirm that the witness is of sound mind, not under duress, and capable of understanding the significance of the oath. Vey considered this. I can do that, but I want to see what we're dealing with first. What exactly is in this archive that's worth all this trouble? 8's optical sensors shifted toward the chamber's interior. This facility contains technological artifacts from the pre-collapse period, including data storage systems, prototype equipment, and historical records. The specific asset targeted by the retrieval contract is a data core containing navigational charts for stable hyperspace routes that were lost during the collapse. Jax's eyes widened. Hyperspace routes? You mean? I mean routes that were deliberately erased from public records following the collapse. Routes that would allow rapid transit between sectors that are currently accessible only through circuitous and dangerous paths. The implications hit Jax like a physical blow. Stable hyperspace routes were among the most valuable commodities in the galaxy. Controlling them meant controlling trade, communication, and military movement. The Syndicate would pay a fortune for such information. So would the Imperial Coalition, the Free Frontier, and every other faction with ships to move and cargo to haul. Wait, Vase said, her voice sharp. You're telling me this archive contains lost hyperspace routes? Routes that could reshape galactic economics. Among other assets, yes. Trent stepped forward, his hand moving unconsciously toward his weapon. Commander, this changes things. If that data gets out, I'm aware of the implications. Vay's expression had shifted from professional detachment to something harder, more calculating. Jax, did you know what you were retrieving? I knew it was valuable. I didn't know specifics. Jax held up his hands. The contract just said, pre-collapse navigational data. I assumed it was survey records, maybe some trade route information. I didn't expect anything like this. Whether you expected it or not, you're sitting on information that could start wars. Vay turned to 8. What happens to this data after the oath is executed? It becomes the property of the oath taker to do with as they see fit. My function shifts from protection to support, facilitating the safe transport of assets to a location of the owner's choosing. And if the oath taker decides to sell this information to the highest bidder, I have no provisions for restricting the use of assets following legitimate transfer. My responsibility is protection, not policy. Vay was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving between Jax and the drone. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. Jax, I need you to understand something. I came here for a payout, same as you. But what we're talking about isn't just valuable, it's dangerous. In the wrong hands, this data could destabilize the entire sector. Factions would go to war over access to those routes. Millions of people could die. I get that, Jax replied. But what do you want me to do? Walk away? Leave it here for the next person who comes along. I want you to think about what happens next. Before you take that oath, before you become responsible for information that could change the galaxy, think about what you're going to do with it. The chamber fell silent, the weight of Vay's words settling over them like a shroud. Jax had spent his entire career focused on the immediate job: get in, get the goods, get out, get paid. He'd never stopped to consider the broader implications of his work, the ripples that spread outward from every transaction. But this was different. This wasn't just salvage. This was power. What would you do? He asked quietly. If you were in my position? Vay's expression softened slightly. I'd think about who I trusted, who I wanted to share that responsibility with. And I'd make damn sure that whoever ended up with this data understood what they were holding. That's not really an answer. It's the only answer I can give. The decision has to be yours. She straightened, her professional demeanor returning. Now, are we doing this? Because your Shadow Network friend isn't going to wait forever, and I'd rather not get caught in a firefight in a flooded archive. Jax looked at 8, at Vay, at Trent. He thought about Ren, waiting somewhere above them, counting on a payout that might never come. He thought about the bounty hunter Cray, tracking him across the sector for reasons that suddenly seemed very small. And he thought about the hyperspace routes, sleeping in their data core, waiting to reshape a galaxy that had forgotten they existed. Let's do it, he said. Contact Ren. Get this verified, so we can move forward. Vay nodded and activated her comm unit. While she spoke with the broker, Jax turned to 8. What exactly does this oath involve? A formal commitment, spoken aloud and recorded for posterity. You will swear to protect the archive's assets, to use them responsibly, and to prevent their exploitation by parties who would cause harm to galactic stability. The oath is binding under pre-collapse law, though enforcement mechanisms are limited. Binding how? What happens if I break it? Nothing immediate. The oath is a matter of record, not a magical constraint. However, violation would result in your designation as an unauthorized party, and I would be obligated to treat you as a security threat. So, I take the oath, get the data, and then you follow me around making sure I don't do anything stupid? Essentially, yes. Jax couldn't decide if that was reassuring or terrifying. Having a combat drone as a permanent companion would certainly discourage enemies, but it also meant having a permanent witness to every decision he made. No more cutting corners, no more gray area deals, no more operating in the shadows. Then again, maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. All right, he said. Let's make it official. The oath itself was surprisingly simple. Jax stood before 8, one hand raised, and spoke the words the drone provided. He swore to protect the assets, to use them wisely, to prevent their exploitation for harmful purposes. They verified Ren's credentials via comlink, confirming that the broker was present, willing, and of sound mind. Trent stood watch at the chamber entrance, his weapon ready in case Sen decided to make an early move. When it was over, 8's optical sensors brightened, and something in its posture shifted, a subtle relaxation, as if a burden had been lifted. The oath is complete, it announced. Jax Vorn, you are now the authorized custodian of Archive Facility 7 Alpha. All assets contained herein are transferred to your ownership, and I am released from stationary defense protocols. My function is now to support and protect you in whatever capacity you require. Jax let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. That's it? No ceremony, no documentation. The ceremony is the documentation. Your words have been recorded and stored in the archive's permanent files. Future visitors will be able to review the transfer of ownership and verify its legitimacy. And the data core, the hyperspace routes, are yours to access at any time. I would recommend reviewing them in a more secure location, however. The Citadel's structural integrity is compromised, and the presence of hostile elements increases the risk of asset loss. You don't have to tell me twice. Jax turned to Vey. We should move. Get to a secure location. Figure out our next steps. Agreed. My ship is docked at the upper level. We can transport the data core and your new drone companion off-world within the hour. What about Sen? Trent spoke up from his position at the entrance. I've been tracking his movements via thermal scan. He's positioned himself near the main airlock, probably planning to intercept us on the way out. We'll need to go through him or find another route. Another route would be better, Jax said. I've had enough confrontations for one day. There is an alternative exit, 8 offered. Emergency evacuation tunnels run from this level to the surface. They were designed for use in the event of flooding or structural collapse. They would allow us to bypass the main airlock entirely. Can we fit through? The tunnels are designed for standard humanoid dimensions. All members of our party should be able to navigate them without difficulty. Vey nodded.
Show us.
The sooner we're off this planet, the better. They gathered the data core, a compact cylinder of pre-collapse engineering that hummed with dormant potential, and made their way toward the emergency tunnels. 8 took point, its weapon systems still deployed in case of unexpected threats. Trent brought up the rear, his eyes constantly scanning the shadows. The tunnels were narrow and dark, lit only by emergency strips that flickered with failing power. Water dripped from overhead pipes, and the sound of their footsteps echoed off ancient walls. Jax found himself thinking about the people who had built this place, the engineers and architects who had designed it to survive the end of the world, never imagining that the end would come so soon. They were halfway to the surface when the first explosion shook the tunnel. Chapter 4. Neon Shadows. The blast came from above, a thunderous roar that sent chunks of ancient concrete raining down around them. Jack stumbled, catching himself against the tunnel wall as the ground bucked and heaved. 8's chassis sparked where a fragment had struck its shoulder, but the drone remained upright, its optical sensors sweeping the darkness. Structural breach detected, it announced. The Citadel has sustained significant damage. I recommend immediate evacuation. What happened? Vey shouted over the ringing in their ears. What caused that explosion? Unknown. However, the blast pattern is consistent with demolition charges placed at structural weak points. Someone is attempting to collapse the facility. Jax's mind raced. Sen was a kinetic warrior, not a demolition expert. But the Shadow Network had resources, contacts, the ability to call in favors from specialists who knew exactly how to bring down a building. If they couldn't get the data core through negotiation, they'd bury it, and everyone who knew about it, under 1 million tons of flooded wreckage. "We need to move faster," he said. "If they're bringing the place down, we don't have much time." They ran. The tunnel stretched ahead, a claustrophobic passage that seemed to go on forever. Behind them, more explosions rocked the structure, each one closer than the last. The lights failed entirely, leaving them in darkness broken only by 8's integrated illumination and the glow of Vay's armor systems. Finally, mercifully, they reached the surface access point, a ladder leading up to a hatch that opened onto the Citadel's uppermost platform. Jax climbed first, shoving the hatch open and emerging into the violet light of the Ocean Planet's eternal twilight. What he saw made his heart stop.
The Citadel was dying.
Great sections of the structure had already collapsed, plunging into the churning sea that had waited so long to reclaim it. Fires burned where electrical systems had overloaded, sending columns of black smoke spiraling into the darkening sky. And everywhere, were the drones, sleek, silver machines that swarmed through the air like mechanical locusts, their weapons firing indiscriminately at anything that moved. "Shadow Network combat drones," Vay said, climbing out behind him. "They must have deployed them while we were underground. This isn't just about the data core, they're erasing evidence." Erasing what? Everything. The archive, the facility, us. By the time they're done, there won't be anything left to prove this place ever existed. 8 emerged from the hatch, followed by Trent. The drone's optical sensors swept the chaos, processing data at speeds no organic mind could match. "I detect multiple hostile units in the immediate vicinity. However, their targeting patterns suggest they are focused on structural destruction rather than personnel elimination. We may be able to reach your vessel undetected if we move quickly and quietly." Quietly. Jax watched a drone strafe a nearby platform, reducing it to molten slag. That thing just vaporized a support beam. The drone was targeting infrastructure, not individuals. The Shadow Network's priority appears to be the destruction of the facility rather than the elimination of witnesses. This suggests they believe the data core is still inside. So, they don't know we have it. Correct. That advantage will not last once they complete their scan of the archive level. I recommend immediate departure. They moved, keeping low and using the chaos as cover. The drones were methodical, efficient, and utterly without mercy. But they were also predictable, following programmed patterns that 8 could anticipate and avoid. The drone led them through the destruction, finding paths through the rubble that Jax would never have spotted on his own. As they approached the docking platform where Vay's ship waited, a new sound cut through the din, the unmistakable whine of a vessel's engines powering up. Jax looked up to see a sleek black shuttle rising from a platform on the far side of the Citadel, its hull marked with the Shadow Network's angular insignia. "Sen," Vay said. "He's getting out." "He must have realized the data core is gone," Trent added. The demolition was cover for his withdrawal. Or a trap. Jax watched the shuttle climb, its engines flaring as it accelerated toward orbit. "Either way, we need to move. If he's calling in reinforcements, this is about to get a lot worse." They reached the Aegis without further incident. Vay's ship was a converted military transport, its hull scarred by 100 engagements, but its systems upgraded with the best technology credits could buy. As soon as they were aboard, the commander sealed the hatch and threw herself into the pilot's seat. "Strap in," she called over her shoulder. "This is going to be rough." The Aegis lifted off just as another explosion tore through the Citadel's central spire. Jax watched through a viewport as the structure he'd spent hours navigating collapsed in on itself, a slow-motion implosion that sent debris cascading into the hungry sea. Within minutes, there was nothing left but scattered wreckage and the fading glow of fires being extinguished by the endless waves. "Archive Facility 7 Alpha is no longer operational," Aide observed. "The assets it contained have been successfully extracted. However, I must note that the Shadow Network's actions suggest a level of commitment that extends beyond simple acquisition." "What do you mean?" "The demolition was thorough, coordinated, and expensive. The Shadow Network does not invest such resources without cause. Their interest in the hyperspace routes suggests they have specific plans for that information, plans that require preventing others from accessing it. They wanted to bury it,
Vey said.
Make sure no one else could use those routes. Or make sure no one knew the routes existed in the first place. Jax's mind was working overtime, connecting pieces of a puzzle he was only beginning to understand. Think about it. If you control the only stable hyperspace routes between major sectors, you control trade, communication, everything. But if those routes become public knowledge, that control evaporates. Competition, Trent said. They don't want the routes for themselves. They want to make sure no one else has them. Precisely. 8's optical sensors turned toward the data core, secured in a containment unit near the cargo bay. The hyperspace routes represent a strategic advantage of immense value. The Shadow Network's actions suggest they already possess this advantage and wish to maintain it. The implications settled over the group like a shroud. They weren't just carrying valuable data, they were carrying a secret that someone was willing to kill to protect. And now that someone knew they had it, we need to get this information somewhere safe, Vey said. Somewhere the Shadow Network can't reach. Where? Jax asked. They have operatives everywhere. The moment we try to sell this data, they'll know. Not sell. Protect. Vey's voice was firm. This isn't about profit anymore. This is about making sure the right people have access to this information, people who won't use it to manipulate the galaxy. You're talking about giving it away. I'm talking about doing the right thing. The thing that prevents wars instead of starting them. Jax wanted to argue, to point out that they'd risked their lives for this data and deserved compensation. But the words died in his throat. He'd seen what the Shadow Network was willing to do to protect their advantage. If that data fell into the wrong hands, if it was used to create monopolies, to strangle trade, to punish enemies, the consequences would be measured in lives, not credits. Where do we go? He asked finally. Vey glanced at 8. You said you're no longer bound to the archive. Do you have recommendations for secure facilities? My database includes coordinates for several pre-collapse installations similar to Archive Facilities 7 Alpha. Many have been destroyed or compromised, but one remains operational and could serve as a secure repository for the hyperspace data. Where? A location known as the Neon-Drenched Rooftops, a city complex on the industrial world of Vertigo Prime. The facility was designed as a backup archive, a secondary storage site for critical information. It has been inactive since the collapse, but remains structurally intact. Vertigo Prime is in contested space, Trent said. Free frontier territory, but with significant syndicate presence. It's not exactly secure. No location is entirely secure, 8 replied. However, the Neon-Drenched Rooftops facility was designed with stealth protocols. It is not registered in any public database and can only be accessed with specific authorization that I can now provide. Vey considered this. It's a risk, but it's better than wandering the galaxy with a target on our backs. She turned to Jax. What do you think? Jax looked at the data core, at 8, at the viewport where the ruins of the Citadel had already vanished beneath the horizon. He thought about the oath he'd sworn, the commitment he'd made to protect the assets and prevent their exploitation. Set a course for Vertigo Prime, he said. Let's get this done. The journey to Vertigo Prime took 3 days, during which time they dodged 2 Shadow Network patrols and intercepted a dozen encrypted transmissions referencing their ship. The network was hunting them, using every resource at their disposal to track down the data core before it could reach its destination. During the quiet hours, Jax found himself spending time with 8, learning about the drone's centuries of isolation and the archive it had protected. The machine was surprisingly philosophical, its extended solitude having given it ample time to contemplate questions of purpose and meaning. Do you regret it? Jax asked during one such conversation. Spending 300 years alone, guarding a treasure no one came for? 8's optical sensors dimmed in what Jax had come to recognize as contemplation. Regret implies a desire for different circumstances. I was designed for a specific purpose, and I fulfilled that purpose. The passage of time did not diminish the value of my function. But you must have been lonely. Loneliness is an organic condition, a response to social deprivation. I am not organic. However, I will acknowledge that the absence of interaction limited my ability to process and contextualize information. Conversations such as this one serve a valuable function in my continued development. So you're learning, growing,
Adapting.
My programming includes provisions for self-modification based on new experiences. The past several days have provided more such experiences than the previous 3 centuries combined. Jax smiled. I'll take that as a compliment. It was intended as one. When they finally emerged from hyperspace near Vertigo Prime, the planet's industrial sprawl stretched before them like a cancer across the world's surface. Factories, refineries, and worker habitats covered every available surface, their lights blazing against the perpetual smog that shrouded the lower atmosphere. The neon-drenched rooftops are located in the planet's northern hemisphere, 8 said. The facility is situated atop a habitation block that was abandoned during the collapse. It should be accessible via the building's maintenance systems. They guided the Aegis through the congested airspace, dodging cargo haulers and passenger shuttles as they made their way toward the coordinates 8 provided. The city below them was a maze of light and shadow, neon signs flickering against the darkness, holographic advertisements painting the smog in garish colors. There, 8 said, highlighting a structure on the ship's display. The facility entrance is located on the building's eastern face, approximately 300 meters from the rooftop. Can we land? The rooftop has sufficient space for a vessel of this size. However, I recommend caution. The area is not as abandoned as initial scans suggested. I am detecting multiple heat signatures within the structure. Jax's hand moved to his sidearm. Occupied. Uncertain. The signatures are consistent with organic life, but their distribution suggests non-standard habitation patterns. They may be squatters, scavengers, or something else entirely. Something else like what? Shadow network operatives would not register as standard organic signatures. Their stealth technology is designed to evade conventional scanning. If they are present, we would not detect them until they chose to reveal themselves. Comforting. Vey brought the ship down on the rooftop, its landing gear settling onto cracked concrete. All right, everyone. We go in, secure the facility, deposit the data core, and get out. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. Understood. Jax nodded, though he suspected the universe had other plans. The entrance to the facility was exactly where 8 had indicated, a maintenance hatch concealed behind a false wall in the building's ventilation system. The drone led the way, its sensors probing the darkness for threats that might be waiting in the shadows. The facility itself was remarkably well preserved, its environmental systems still functioning after 3 centuries of neglect. The corridors were clean, the lights operational, and the data storage arrays hummed with dormant potential. It was, in many ways, a mirror of Archive Facility 7 Alpha, another forgotten repository of knowledge, waiting for someone to claim it. They reached the central storage chamber without incident. 8 interfaced with the facility's systems, initiating the transfer protocols that would integrate the hyperspace data into the archive's permanent records. Transfer initiated, the drone announced. The data will be fully integrated within approximately 2 hours. Once the process is complete, the information will be accessible to anyone with appropriate authorization. And who has that authorization? Vey asked. Currently, only Jax Vorn and myself. However, the facility includes provisions for expanding access to designated parties. It would be possible to grant access to representatives of various factions, ensuring that no single group can monopolize the information. That's actually a good idea, Jax said. If everyone has the routes, no one can use them as a weapon. Precisely. The oath you swore includes a commitment to responsible use of assets. Widespread distribution would fulfill that commitment while also protecting the information from destruction. The transfer process began, data flowing from the core into the facility's ancient systems. Jax watched the progress indicators climb, feeling the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders. In a few hours, the hyperspace routes would be available to anyone who knew where to look. The shadow network's advantage would evaporate. The galaxy would change. And then the facility's alarms began to scream. Chapter 5. The Price of Secrets. Intrusion Alert. 8 announced its weapon systems deploying automatically. Multiple contacts breaching the facility's perimeter. Shadow network signatures detected. Jax's heart sank. They found us. Apparently. I recommend immediate defensive positioning. The facility's layout provides several tactical advantages, if properly exploited. Vey and Trent moved to cover the chamber's entrance, their weapons trained on the corridor beyond. Jax stayed close to the data transfer console, watching the progress bar crawl forward. 8 stood between them, its optical sensors tracking multiple targets simultaneously. How many? Vey asked. I am detecting 7 distinct signatures, with the possibility of additional stealth units. Their approach pattern suggests coordinated assault tactics. They intend to breach from multiple angles simultaneously. Can we hold them off until the transfer completes? Unknown. The transfer requires 1 hour and 43 minutes remaining. The assault will reach our position in approximately 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Jax's mind raced. We can't hold off a Shadow Network assault team for 2 hours. Agreed. I recommend alternative strategies. 8's optical sensors turned toward him. You are the facility's authorized administrator. The systems will respond to your commands. There may be options available that I am not programmed to consider. Jax looked at the console, at the data flowing from the core into the archive. The transfer was irreversible. If interrupted, the partial data would be corrupted, useless. But if they could complete it, even partially, some of the routes would be preserved. What happens if I authorize emergency distribution? He asked. Send the data to multiple locations simultaneously? The facility's communication systems are capable of transmitting to designated recipients. However, such transmission would require suspending the transfer process, potentially corrupting the data. Corrupting how? Approximately 40% of the routes would be lost. The remaining 60% would be transmitted successfully. 60% is better than nothing. Jax made his decision.
Do it.
Send everything we've got to every major faction, the Coalition, the Syndicate, the Frontier. All of them. Make sure the Shadow Network can't bury this. Transmission would require approximately 12 minutes. During that time, the facility's systems would be fully occupied. Defensive capabilities would be limited. We'll hold them off, Vey said. Just get that data out. 8 initiated the emergency transmission. Data streams began flowing from the facility's communication arrays, broadcasting hyperspace coordinates across the galaxy. Somewhere on distant worlds and distant stations, recipients would be receiving information that could change everything. The first Shadow Network operative breached the chamber 4 minutes later. He came through the wall rather than the door, a stealthed entry point that 8 hadn't detected. His weapon was already firing, energy bolts scorching the air where Vey had been standing a moment before. The commander rolled, came up firing, and caught the operative in the shoulder. He staggered but didn't fall, his armor absorbing the impact. More followed. The chamber erupted into chaos, energy weapons and projectile rounds filling the air with deadly light. 8 engaged multiple targets simultaneously, its precision targeting dropping operatives with mechanical efficiency. Trent held the main entrance, his heavy weapon creating a kill zone that no one could cross. Jax stayed at the console, watching the transmission progress. 40%. 50%. The firefight raged around him, deafening and terrifying, but he didn't move. This was his responsibility now. His oath. 60%. 70%. An operative broke through Trent's line, rushing toward the console with a device that Jax recognized as a data scrambler. If planted, it would corrupt everything, the transmission, the archive, all of it. Jax drew his sidearm and fired, the shot going wide. The operative grinned behind his helmet and raised the scrambler. 8 appeared between them, taking 3 shots to its chassis that would have killed any organic being. Its arm transformed into a blade that separated the operative's head from his shoulders in a single motion. Transmission at 85%, the drone announced, its voice calm despite the damage it had sustained. Estimated time to completion, 4 minutes. Can you hold? I will hold. Protect the console. Jax turned back to the progress bar, his hands shaking. 90%. 92. The firefight continued, Vey shouting orders, Trent's weapon overheating, the Shadow Network operatives pressing their assault with desperate intensity. 97%. 99. Transmission complete, 8 said. All hyperspace route data has been distributed to designated recipients. The shadow network's advantage has been neutralized. Jax let out a breath that was half sob, half laugh. It was done. The information was out, beyond anyone's ability to contain or control. Whatever happened next, the galaxy would never be the same. Fall back. Vay shouted. We've done what we came to do. Get to the ship. They withdrew, 8 covering their retreat with precision fire that kept the remaining operatives at bay. The facility's corridors were filled with smoke and the acrid smell of burning electronics, but they moved quickly, following the path they'd memorized on the way in. They reached the rooftop just as the building's structural supports began to fail. The Aegis sat where they'd left it, engines already warming in anticipation of rapid departure. Vay threw herself into the pilot seat, and within seconds they were airborne, climbing through Vertigo Prime's polluted atmosphere toward the safety of orbit. Behind them, the building collapsed in on itself, taking the facility and everything it contained down into the rubble. The Shadow Network operatives who hadn't escaped were buried under 1,000,000 tons of concrete and steel. Did we lose them? Jax asked, watching the destruction through the viewport. I am detecting no pursuit signatures, 8 replied. However, the Shadow Network will not consider this matter settled. The loss of their hyperspace advantage represents a significant strategic setback. They will seek retribution. Let them come, Vay said. We've got the truth on our side now. And pretty soon, everyone else will too. Chapter 6. Horizon. 3 weeks later, Jax stood on the observation deck of a space station orbiting a yellow dwarf star, watching the stellar prominences dance across the star's surface. The view was spectacular, one of the natural wonders of a galaxy that most people never got to see. But that was changing now. The hyperspace routes had been distributed, verified, and confirmed by navigators across the sector. The Shadow Network's monopoly on rapid transit was over, and the economic and political landscape was already shifting in response. Trade routes that had taken months could now be traversed in days. Isolated systems were reconnecting with the galactic community. The balance of power that had held for 3 centuries was dissolving, replaced by something new and uncertain. There had been consequences, of course. The Shadow Network had not taken the loss gracefully. Assassination attempts, corporate sabotage, political manipulation, the organization was fighting back with every tool at its disposal. But the information was out now, impossible to contain. The genie was out of the bottle, and no amount of violence could put it back. You did a good thing, Vay said, appearing at his shoulder. A stupid thing, maybe, but good. Jax smiled. I'm still not sure which it was myself. Both, probably. That's usually how it works. She handed him a data pad. The Coalition has offered a reward for the hyperspace data. Substantial. Enough to clear your debts and set you up comfortably. I didn't do it for money. I know. That's why they're offering it anyway. They want to encourage that kind of behavior.
She paused.
There's also a contract. They're looking for people with your particular skill set, people who can find lost things and make difficult decisions. They're offering a position. Jax looked at the data pad, at the official seal of the Imperial Coalition and the terms outlined below. Steady work, good pay, the resources of a major faction at his disposal. Everything he'd spent his career chasing, offered freely. What about you? He asked. What are you going to do? I've got my own offer. The Free Frontier is establishing a new trade consortium, and they need someone with military experience to handle security. It's honest work, important work. I think I'm going to take it. And Trent. He's staying with me. Someone has to watch my back. Jax nodded, looking back out at the star. I think I'm going to pass on the Coalition offer. Vay raised an eyebrow. Really? You'd turn down that kind of stability. Stability isn't really my thing. He gestured to where 8 stood near the entrance, its damaged chassis still bearing the scars of their escape from Vertigo Prime. I've got a new partner and we've got a new mission. There are more archives out there, more lost knowledge waiting to be found. Someone has to find it, and that someone is you? That someone is us. Jax turned to face her. Thanks for everything, Commander. I wouldn't have made it without you. That's Sarah. And you're welcome. She smiled, a genuine expression that softened her military bearing. Try not to get yourself killed. I'd hate to have gone through all that just to lose you now. I'll do my best. She left, and Jax was alone with the view and his thoughts. The star's surface churned below, a reminder of the vastness of the galaxy and the smallness of the people who inhabited it. But small didn't mean insignificant. Sometimes, one person's choices could change everything. 8 approached, its optical sensors reflecting the stellar light. I have completed my diagnostic assessment. My systems are functioning at 83% capacity. Repairs will require access to specialized facilities. We'll find them. We've got the whole galaxy to explore now. Indeed. And the hyperspace routes to reach it efficiently. The drone paused, a gesture that Jax had learned indicated something important was coming. I have been processing the events of the past several weeks. My programming did not anticipate this outcome when I was activated 312 years ago. What outcome is that? Purpose. I was designed to protect assets, but I have come to understand that protection alone is insufficient. Knowledge must be shared, distributed, used to improve the condition of the galaxy. By releasing the hyperspace data, we have fulfilled a higher function than simple preservation. You're saying you're glad we did it. I am saying that I have found meaning beyond my original parameters. This is unexpected. And welcome. Jax smiled, placing a hand on the drone's shoulder, a gesture of connection between two beings who had found each other in the darkness and emerged into the light. Come on, he said. We've got work to do. They left the observation deck together, heading toward the docking bay where Jax's newly acquired ship waited. The galaxy stretched before them, vast and unknown, filled with secrets waiting to be discovered and stories waiting to be told. It was a good day to be a scavenger.